Ready to go. Welcome everyone. My name is Erica Mixon. I'm the content marketing manager here at Blumira. I'll do a quick intro for our participants in a moment, but just so everyone knows, we're covering, the title is This Thing On? We're covering how to test your SIEM. And we've got two great experts on with us today. We've got Amanda Berlin, who's the lead incident detection engineer at Blumira. Hey, Amanda, thanks for joining. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I started in security about 10 years ago. I've been working in IT for over 20, which makes me feel really old. But I've been at Blumira now since the beginning and spend a lot of time crafting detections and playing in the lab. And then those are some of the other things that I do listed there.
Awesome. And then we have AJ King, who is the CISO of BreachQuest. Welcome, AJ. Thank you so much for joining.
Hey, thank you very much. Happy to be here. So my background is, as Amanda, I got into security about 7 to 8 years ago. Been in IT for a little bit over 15 years. And my background, really, I'm the CISO at BreachQuest. So we're a services company that deals with everything from incident response through penetration testing, security maturity assessments, post-breach remediation activities. So we do a lot here at BreachQuest. My background is came up through the financial services Fortune 100 space, and have been building and leading security teams really for the last 6 to 8 years or so.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about what BreachQuest does specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I talked a little bit about it, but we're a services-led product company. Work a lot with, I would say, insurance panels and insurance boards around incident response. So when a particular company that has a cyber insurance policy has an incident, they are calling their insurance company. Their insurance company is calling counsel, and counsel is engaging us to respond to that incident. Those services can be everything from the initial defer work that needs to be done. So in the event of a ransomware, we're negotiating with the threat actor, ensuring that payment is made, ensuring that encryption keys are returned. And then we have a unit that will really help that customer recover from that. And we're not just saying, hey, we found the initial entry point and we're out. We can do everything from deploying those encryption keys through rebuilding if the customer decides that they do not want to pay or have the ability to restore from backups. We can rebuild servers, and then really we sit with the customer and say, hey, how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again, right? And so we'll look at things, control gaps, right, that could have helped that customer avoid that incident from a future state perspective, and really then work to implement a roadmap with that customer to change those services, those service gaps. So we're hiring. BreachQuest.com, the website's live. If you're a security professional looking for a job, please feel free to reach out.
Excellent. Thank you for that overview. You guys must be pretty busy with all the recent ransomware incidents too.
Yep, keeps us hopping for sure.
Absolutely. Well, we're happy to have you on. And as I said, today we're going to be talking about testing your SIEM. So can you guys talk a little bit about the challenges with SIEMs today? I know that SIEMs kind of have a bad rap for being overly noisy, difficult to maintain and manage. From the perspective of like a traditional SIEM, what are some challenges that you two are seeing day to day?
Yeah, so before I came to Blumira, I worked with a couple different SIEMs, we can go to the next slide and kind of go over them. There's a lot of the same pain points that people have to go through. So not only what you see here, but total cost of ownership is usually really high. When you go to implement a SIEM, a lot of times people will think it's just a one-time, all right, I'm going to implement it, and then that's my project and I'm done. More forethought doesn't go into it sometimes when it comes to like, oh, well, I actually have to continue to tune this and continue to make it change with, everything that's going on in your infrastructure. And then like the three things listed here. So limited teams, if you have an on-prem SIEM even that you're going to try and roll yourself or buy and have, on-premise like servers and all that infrastructure, you basically have to have a full team. A lot of places will kind of just pile that on top of whatever your security team or infrastructure team is, and like, oh well, like you also can handle the SIEM, right? And it's fairly common and not the best way to go about it, because you quickly realize it's a full-time job. It's not something that's a project and it goes away. It's something that it's a process. You just have to continually work with it and make sure it's giving you what you need. And that's kind of why we're going to cover what we do today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, I would agree there and just say, my experiences, most companies underestimate the amount of work that it takes to implement. One of my last slides on my last slide deck at my last company to a board was security is not a destination; it's a state of being, right? So many executives and others don't understand that when you're purchasing something, it's not just I write a check for $1 million to buy Splunk and the licensing for Splunk, but then it is truly, as Amanda said, it's a team of engineers to implement it and keep it up and running, keep it patched, right? Keep it configured, do tuning and rules. It is a team of SOC, analysts that are there to consume those rules, right? And when kind of this last point here, the manual side of things, it very quickly, limited teams, very quickly rolls into alert fatigue that then turns into manual tuning. It just becomes the snowball that at some point in time, many companies will just say, yeah, we have the SIEM over there and it generates alerts, but it becomes shelfware almost at that point in the checkbox to say we've deployed a SIEM because they can't make it usable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I did launch a poll for the attendees. When deploying your previous SIEM, how long did it take you? For right now, we're halfway through the poll. It looks like a lot of people are saying days, around 44%. And then there's another 31% that says months. One answered years, and then 3 people answered it was never successfully deployed. I'm curious, if you voted for days, would you mind dropping in the chat and just letting us know, are you a Blumira customer or using something else? If you don't want to share with everyone, that's totally fine. You can just hit chat with the panelists. Curious to see everyone's feedback here.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, AJ and Amanda, how, when you've worked with SIEMs in the past, how long has it taken you guys?
Depending on the environment, right? Depends on the skill set internally and the drive and the time that they have, if they're going to set aside a full team, and if they have, SIEM engineers on staff.
Mm-hmm.
It was never days. Actually, when I came from another MSSP, we handled a different SIEM. That's a big name in the industry. And many times our roadmap, just with implementation and log ingestion and tuning, was somewhere around 9 to 10 months. Because the first 3 months is, building the server infrastructure and installing all the software and making sure it's all correctly deployed and everything. And then the next 3 months is implementing all of the rules and detections and making sure that you're covering, all of the log types that they have sending to you. And then after that is another, 3 to 5 months of tuning continuously.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like an MSSP model. So it was like, I argued with the people that started Blumira when they brought me on, because I didn't believe that you could do it in less than 3 months. I thought they were, it's kind of like a pipe dream or whatever, but it can be done. Surprisingly, I was proven wrong.
Yeah, and I think as Amanda pointed out, and really, Shane pointed out here in the chat as well, is quote unquote deployment, right? As far as standing up, maybe just the software, right? Maybe fairly quick. But I think as Amanda pointed out earlier, even all the things like what are all the log sources, right, that you want to ingest into your SIEM? What are the use cases, right, for that and tuning? And I think maybe next time rather than deployment, we say to get it into an actual usable state that is providing value to your organization. right? Because in lots of organizations, they can say, yeah, I've deployed a SIEM. Okay, cool. So how are you using it? How is it benefiting your security program,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Those are vastly different things. And, in my experience, when you start talking about log sources, the vast majority of those log sources come from places where security does not have a direct decision-making ability to drive those log sources, right? So you're now dependent on other teams to provide you those log sources, right? And maybe they make a change, and all of a sudden your log sources are now no longer flowing in, and so it is truly, in many cases, as Amanda said, months to get it, if not closer to a year, depending on, again, the size of an organization, to get it into an actual state where it's usable, consumable, contributing to your security program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the great thing about Blumira is it comes pre-tuned, right, Amanda? So that tuning process isn't as robust as a lot of other SIEMs, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, it's never going to be zero, right?
Right.
Because every environment's different. But we put as much engineering and testing effort in the back end as humanly possible to make it so, when we roll something out, gosh, I think we just hit like 700 different types of detections. Depending on what log source you get, most of those can be rolled out right away with high fidelity, which a lot of SIEMs now that you get, I think, start out with 20 to 100 maybe, and then you have to write the rest yourself.
Right.
I really like the next slide. If you look at the next slide, and it talks about kind of the process, that it takes for getting that into your organization, right? What does that look like, and the success factors that are behind there versus not. So I think that speaks to the different elements of staff, timing, dedicated engineers, and when you talk about spend at the board level and impact to your security program, that was one of the first questions that I always got asked when I went and asked for funding was, that's great, how quickly can it actually show results, and how are you going to prove that it's showing results, right? So when you talk about something like Blumira and the ability to say, we get to spin this up in days, right? And instantly my SOC analysts get those high fidelity alerts that matter, that I actually want them spending their time on, right? That is really just ammunition in your pouch to back you up when it comes to funding your security program.
Absolutely. One thing I do want to mention is one of our attendees said that it did take them days because they were using Blumira, and that our technical onboarding was a huge help in regards to that. So great to hear some customer success stories there. So Amanda, do you want to talk a little bit about what the goal of deploying a SIEM would be? Sure.
In its simplest form, to detect all the bad stuff, right? That's one of the main goals anyways. There's a lot of goals that people have, depending on the organization. A lot of people will use it for operational alerts, like, is this hard drive failing? Because it's so much nicer to not have to rely on, all right, I have to go and check all the event logs for all 300 of my servers, just to check up on their performance. So anything from security to operational to threat hunting, incident response related stuff. I'm sure AJ, you've seen a lot of SIEMs be fairly helpful if they have them in an organization to find articles for incidents, artifacts for incidents. So yeah, it really depends, but the major goal is definitely going to be security related. There's a lot of products out there that aren't they can call themselves a SIEM, but aren't by default. It's just a log aggregator, which is helpful also. Like it's helpful to get all your logs in one place and not have to go searching everywhere for them. But a SIEM definitely takes it a step further, and it's supposed to be for handling incidents and events, security wise.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things around SIEM, right, is quantifiable alerts, right? It's not just getting all the alerts into one place. It's having the ability to do the work from a technology perspective to reduce alert fatigue, so that your analysts are not looking for a needle in a stack of needles, and eventually just get burnout and say, yeah, Billy Bob Thornton, he runs PowerShell every single day, so I ignore all of his PowerShell alerts, right? And instead, you now have something that's quantifiable that says, yes, we know Billy Bob runs PowerShell, but now all of a sudden this is different, right? And this is why it's different from the past, and this is something that I actually need to pay attention to, because you don't want your analysts spending time going through and acting or rejecting marking false positive alerts. You want them actually investigating real threats that are coming in, right? And so everything from architecture, right? You talk about how data is ingested in, and you don't want all log data for every single thing inside your SIEM, right? It's going to cost you massive amounts of money, unless maybe you go with a product like Blumira. But if you go with some of these other large name providers and you don't think about slicing that data off, right? It's going to be a massive cost to you. So for me, for a SIEM, it is empowering my security team to focus on the right things rather than just all the things.
Yeah, that's a great point, AJ. Thank you so much for bringing that up. And then we're also going to, here's the meat of our talk here is why test your SIEM and how to do that. And it seems like there are some roadblocks that prevent people from testing their SIEM. AJ, can you talk a little bit to that? Is that something that you've seen a lot in this industry, that testing a SIEM isn't necessarily a default for most organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are definitely companies out there that do test their SIEM, but the vast majority of companies out there that have a SIEM don't have that maturity in their space to really perform those kind of purple teaming actions. The extent of testing that I've seen may be, hey, we're implementing a new rule or a new detection, let's test it at the initial entry point, right? And beyond that, there's not really testing that's going on to say, is that rule that I configured 4 months ago actually working, right? And does it still perform the function that I want it to perform? Mainly it goes back to, some of those things, everything from alert fatigue to not appropriate staffing. We don't have time to do that testing because, we have all these other things that we have to do. So it is definitely something that I think is lacking across the industry as a whole.
Right. I actually launched a poll for the attendees. What's preventing you from testing your SIEM? And this is an anonymous poll. We chose to make this one anonymous because, we know that one of the options, fear of finding out it doesn't work properly, doesn't necessarily put you in the best light. So feel free to respond as honestly as you can. Like I said, this is anonymous, so feel free to just plug in your answer there. And if you chose other, I'm curious, and we won't reveal your information here, but is there, what other is that? What other roadblocks have we not mentioned that you're dealing with in regards to testing your SIEM? And, the whole point of this talk, right, Amanda, is that we're coming up with pretty easy ways to test the SIEM. And how many people would this require? Is it one person, two people? What would you say?
Definitely one. I think we go over 5 different things, if I'm remembering correctly. Mm-hmm. And they all take a minute or so. And that's what we're here for, right? If you want to test something and it doesn't fire, that's what I enjoy doing. Things break. Firewall rules get put up and block log traffic, or log ingestion break. Something could break along the way. You always want to test something, right? Put it on your calendar for once a month to do some kind of testing. One of the easier ones is adding a new domain admin. You can script that in PowerShell, fairly easy. And there's a couple different ways that you can do it that fire off several detections. If you encode your PowerShell command and add a new domain admin, it's going to fire off 4 things. It's super helpful. I wish more people did it. It's one of my favorite things to do, is the whole purple teaming thing. Anytime that we can tell one of our customers is having a pen test, that's always super fun, because you're never going to catch anything, but it's always about I know it's kind of a buzzword, but always about defense in depth, right? You need to catch them at some point. That's the whole purpose of why we have so many detections, because you're not going to catch them an attacker along every step of the way. There's just some stuff that's almost impossible to detect, but everything an attacker does is not. So testing that kind of stuff out that we know is part of an attack chain, and that we've seen from customer to customer is some of the things that we'll go over.
Right.
Yeah, and I take a little bit of an additional spin on that, and I would say it also instills confidence in your security operations staff, right? And in some cases, a sense of accomplishment. The way I like to run my pen test in a lot of cases is I actually don't tell the SOC that there's a pen test going on, because I'm interested to see what it is that we're detecting, right? And if ahead of that you've tested all your detection rules, and your SOC is confident in the alerts that do come up, knowing that they're quality alerts, it's just human nature that they're gonna I would say act on those with more ferocity, intensity, however you want to say it, because they know and have seen themselves for it to be true, right? So I love that approach when it comes to testing your SIM, and especially as you start talking with junior analysts, right? And they're the ones that are triaging those thousands of alerts that come in, reducing that load on them, and having them know that those alerts are quality is an awesome quality of life for those people.
Yeah, one point that one of our attendees brought up would just be the perception that it's working just fine. They said, we get notifications on our sensor rule. I guess I never thought to test, and I'm excited to hear some options on what and how to test. So it's great. Let's get into it.
Yep. All right. Yeah, I guess you can skip right onto that. So my idea was to kind of go and pick a couple different tests that hit different parts of the cyber kill chain, right? So there's different steps and different things that it's nice to tie to when it comes to like phases of an attack. One of those is recon. So password spraying, I don't know how many people know what password spraying is, so I'd like to kind of explain it a little bit. So there's a bunch of different, there's password spraying, there's credential stuffing, there's brute forcing, and they're all kind of different. Password spraying is going to pick a bunch of random passwords and spray it against a bunch of random usernames. And this tool called Domain Password Spray is by Bo Bullock from Black Hills Information Security, and at DaftHack is his GitHub name and Twitter. So you can go and find this PowerShell script on his GitHub. And it's literally two PowerShell command lines is it. You import the module. So it's a PowerShell script that you download from him. You have like this usernames.txt that you can fill with a bunch of random usernames, so they're not actually locking out real accounts. And then there's passwords.txt, which also just put a bunch of random passwords in. There's different thresholds depending on an environment. I think base threshold to go to like, I think this does 36 is the test that I did, but you can do like 50 or whatever. It will check for an account lockout policy by default and make sure that it's not locking out a bunch of accounts, but you should put all fake ones in there anyways, and you won't have to worry about it. So all you do is import that module, and then you invoke it and give it, what your user list and what your password list is, and this is what that should look like. So 4625 is the Windows event ID that shows failed logons, and it shows right there, account failed to log on. As long as your 4625 logs are going into your SIM, you should be able to detect on password spraying. It's a one-to-many type thing, right? So most password spraying, anyways, there's a couple different variants that you can do, but the one device trying to connect to a bunch of different user accounts over a short amount of time is what you can usually detect on. And on the right there is what it looks like in Blumira when we can detect Outlook web access anomalous access attempts, which is pretty much the same thing. Just I feel like it might be a different event ID, but same idea. Is a fairly easy one to run. From downloading the script, creating the 2 files, and running that, maybe 5-10 minutes of your day. So it's fairly simple, straightforward to do, and you can test it definitely go through any change management or anything. I'm not saying just go do this everywhere. Check and make sure you're allowed first. But yeah, one of my more favorite ones that you can do for recon anyways.
Yeah, and so, I mean, from my perspective, there's a couple of things. So, Alan, just so there, this deck will be available, and it's got the GitHub link at the bottom of the slide as well. So that's where you can get the script. But I look at this from a couple of ways. One, I've been involved in numerous incidents, right, that have used password spraying as their initial point of entry vector. And if you think about this from, you know, a SOC perspective or an enterprise perspective, if you see this in your environment, you already know that no one should be doing this in your environment, right? It's a very high quality alert, right? If you have your devices configured, right? If you have your logs configured correctly, if it's tuned and tested correctly, you can say no one should be doing this, right? And so that is something that you can act on. When I think about a business email compromise incident that we worked on, you know, back in 2019, it was truly password spraying, and what went in was the summer of 2019, right? And that's a kind of a cliche in the industry, but that's what happened, and it led to, you know, multiple wires going out from the organization. You know, 2 weeks of incident response. You know, that it cost that organization, you know, many, I would say, millions of dollars to remediate, not just on the incident response side of things, but also on just the e-discovery and legal and you know, notification side of things. So being able to detect something like this with Blumira is a low level you know, event that will say, hey, I've got someone that's actively targeting my organization.
Right. And if you do a cost benefit analysis there of, you know, the cost of, what is it, 5 minutes to test this detection, Amanda, and then the cost to, you know, have a password spraying attempt be successful seems extremely detrimental to a company, especially a small to mid-sized business.
Right.
So let's go over the test number 2, Amanda.
Yeah. So this is on the next step, right? So privilege escalation. We've seen this several times on customers' externally facing servers, where someone got remote code execution and they were able to run a PowerShell script that downloaded more stuff and gave them more access to that device. So this is one of them. There's the blog there at the bottom, and I'll copy that into chat also. Or Erica, maybe you can do it because
I can do that.
Was asking what Mac can work. So this, if you don't know what execution policy is in PowerShell, it's not a security measure. It's more like, if you're familiar with Linux, it's like not having chmod, like the ability to run a file on a file. So it's more like it was implemented to kind of just be a fail safe for accidentally running PowerShell code when they first initially wrote PowerShell. So by default, it's set to restricted, and a lot of malware and other malicious stuff will try and bypass that execution policy when they're attempting to do something, because why not? Like it's an easy thing to bypass. That log has 15 different ways to do it. And it's also fairly easy to detect on, as long as you're getting the right logs, and we'll also at the end cover how to get all the logs that you need out of Windows. So getting your execution policy will show you it's restricted. You can set it if it's not restricted to try and, I mean, either way, it doesn't matter if it is or not, you can still try and bypass it. But here it just calls, so PowerShell -no P means load PowerShell with no profile. You can have your own custom PowerShell profiles as a user. I'm trying to see it. -C, I think, is the, -C is the shortened version of command, and that's you passing a PowerShell command, an external command into PowerShell. And it's doing some stuff with .NET and downloading something from Bitly. So if you go to that Bitly link, it's really just a file that says that my voice is my passport, verify me. And that's the text file that they use in all their testing on that blog post. But you just trying to bypass that by, you know, using, you shouldn't be able to run that PowerShell script, right? But you can use .NET to download it and run it anyways. And that's what this looks like. So at least part of it. So if you run it in PowerShell, it'll be one thing. So in PowerShell, it's event 4103. If you run it and call PowerShell from a command line, it's 4668, creating a new process. And you can log all command line also through a setting in your policy. And this is all blocked out because it's an actual previous customer or current customer that happened before of their web server getting a Cobalt Strike dropper on it. And that web server was then compromised and they had to take it offline and do all this triage. But that just caught it because they were trying to bypass that profile. Bypass that execution policy.
Mm-hmm. And you were talking earlier about, the importance of being able to differentiate between a malicious act like that and then something like your local admin developer, like running a PowerShell script. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. So there's a couple of pieces. So when BreachQuest is responding, into an incident, I can't tell you the number of places that we've gone that has had malicious PowerShell that we don't have PowerShell logging enabled, right? And so, I'm going to pimp the script that Amanda's going to drop here kind of at the end of the call. But turning on, PowerShell logging is one of those critical things, within your environment that you have to have. But when you do turn that on, right, that then turns into you have tons of development teams inside your space that are, or administrators or sysadmins, right, that are using PowerShell to do their jobs. Right. And so now you have an understaffed, overwhelmed team. And you're like, hey, check out all these 10,000 more PowerShell alerts that you're going to get. And oh, by the way, you need to qualify those because some of those very well could be malicious. Right. And so unless you have, some process in place, a tool in place, such as Blumira, right, that's going to help you qualify those alerts and reduce those alerts down into truly this isn't the actionable alert that you should care about. Again, you talk about that time value proposition, right? Taking a web server offline after Cobalt Strike has been dropped on it and compromised. Does that suck? Yes, it does. Does it impact business? Yeah, probably because it was internet facing, right? But is it less of an impact than a security incident? Absolutely, right? So I think it is. There's just so many, I would say, force amplifiers, right? When it comes to doing proper PowerShell logging. In your environment and qualification of those alerts within your environment.
Yeah, that's a great point, AJ. Thanks for bringing that up. Seems like, qualifying those events would just be a full-time job in itself.
It is. I remember one of my very first security management roles and going to interns and watching them sit there for many hours, just like staring at the screen, right? Just reading and acknowledging and trying to be quality because they're new in security and they're not, they care, right? They want to see those things. And so the alert fatigue is real. You can only, I think the most I've seen someone be able to last in a SIEM that isn't tuned is maybe 6 months, right? And there's so many alerts, they just stop caring and start hitting, acknowledge and start assuming rather than following through.
Yeah, I feel like I'm getting a headache just thinking about that job.
There's a lot of turnover in like SOC analyst 1 positions.
Which is, again, you start talking about building, if you're a security executive, right, that's looking to build a use case for purchasing a tool like a Blumira, right? Think of all the aspects that are involved in the value case proposition that you get. And if you can say things like, look, instead of needing 5 analysts, I only need 3. And oh, by the way, the 3 analysts are actually going to get to do quality work instead of just mashing buttons, right? Trying to clear alerts out of the queue every day, right? That should go into your use case, right? Because it's quality of life and getting, you don't want knowledge walking out the door. Recruiting's expensive, hiring's expensive. It's a pain in the butt. Nobody likes to do it, right? So once you find that person that's good, having those tools to back them up to do their job is critically important.
Absolutely. AJ, do you want a spot on the Blumira marketing team?
Thank you, but I am
we'll find an opening.
BreachQuest does. I love my role BreachQuest.
Of course, I'm just joking. So let's talk about the third test that you developed, Amanda. Can you explain this one a little bit?
Sure. Another really super easy one. All you have to do is download PS Tools from Microsoft. So they have an entire sysinternal suite that you can download, and PS Exec is one of them. I used it a lot as a sysadmin a long time ago. And if you're not a sysadmin, you can do a lot of damage with PS Exec by just being able to run random commands remotely throughout your Windows environment. So people use that for lateral movement. And really, you can just try and run the command prompt on a different box in your environment. And if it works or not, I mean, it should detect the process creation also. So it's just one of those things that kind of a low hanging fruit. It's fairly easy to look. Oh yeah, and I guess you can cover that poll if you want to, Erica.
Yeah, so this is something that you need Sysmon to catch, right? So one poll that I just launched right now for the attendees is if you have Sysmon deployed. Curious to hear your feedback. And we have, if you don't have it deployed, we have a wonderful guide that Amanda wrote about how to enable it. Goes through the step-by-step process, and we'll share that as well.
Yeah, and the thing I'll comment here on PS Exec is that, you know, for all of the incidents that BreachQuest has responded to over the last, you know, pick your time period, PS Exec is used at the ransomware deployment stage. So when those threat actors are ready, they have the foothold, they have the access, they have the credentials in your environment, right? They start using PS Exec to distribute and do things at scale in your environment. So you talk about, again, being able to detect here and knowing that ransomware is coming in your environment. If you start seeing high quality PS Exec alerts come through, you should be taking action almost immediately.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Amanda, did you cover this slide? I apologize.
Yeah, it's just what it looks like in Event Viewer. So on the left-hand side is the Sysmon version. It gives a lot more detail when it comes to the process. And then on the right-hand side is if you don't have Sysmon, you can still kind of detect it. It just doesn't give you as much information with the process creation.
Gotcha.
And from an incident responder perspective, please have Sysmon deployed. Like,
right. It's free.
it helps
It's
so
free.
much. Yes, it is, you know, the step-by-step, you know, directions rather than getting directions from, you know, the cashier that says, well, you go down the road a piece and then you turn right at the barn. You know, it truly has those breadcrumbs for you to follow.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the good news is it looks like the majority of our attendees do have Sysmon deployed, but still a good chunk, 32% don't have it deployed. So curious to see what your roadblocks are, if any, for you know, your reasoning for not deploying Sysmon. If you feel free to
deploy it.
What's that?
So you could use PS Exec to deploy it.
So feel free to share in the chat. Again, you can just chat us panelists. Feel free to explain what your roadblocks are to deploying Sysmon. Curious as to what your feedback is there.
And then that's what it looks like in Blumira.
All right, so test number 4. Let's go.
Yeah, so we did a lot of Windows-based detections already, right? And this is like there's a lot of business email compromise that is like Office 365 and G Suite and all of those cloud products related. Setting up forwarding and inbox rules is something that happens a lot during business email compromise and fairly easy to test on. So, you know, create an inbox rule that forwards all of your email to an external address, right? So here you can see on the left-hand side that I'm sending it to my Berlin at Blumira.com, but this is from our lab, so technically it's external. And then also setting up an inbox rule. So again, probably takes 10 minutes to do. And then as soon as you do that, just delete it. Like that log is already there being shipped somewhere. And that should definitely get detected on.
Yeah, and I would say from an incident response perspective, detection perspective, there's a couple of thought processes here. One, you know, if I was to take an example, a client that we talked to here within the last month, again, had a business email compromise from one of their trusted third parties. their trusted third party emailed them, a document that they ended up being an Office 365 phishing document. They then lost, over the course of 2 months, $165,000, because what happened is that threat attacker injected themselves into the PO process mid conversation. They set up rules, right, to change the workflow from an email perspective to where they would get the email outside the organization, be able to respond as the customer. And again, this small, medium-sized business isn't getting that money back. They don't have cyber insurance, right? And that is extremely common. Most people don't actually realize that the losses from business email compromise vastly outstrip those of ransomware, right? Most of those impacts are smaller in nature. You're not seeing, a $10 million ransom, something along those lines. Although there are some of those headline news stories around business email compromise leads to someone buying an aircraft in the middle, or an airport in the middle of Africa. That's probably my favorite one. But from an IR perspective, I would actually prefer that you turn this functionality off, right? And you talk about, you can go in and set to where no one inside of your organization can set up a rule to automatically forward email outside of your environment. If you do have a business use case where you're like, look, we've got vendors that, perform, AP process for us or something along those lines, then again, having a tool like this that says, hey, Billy that works in, maintenance, right, and all of a sudden set up auto forwarding of all of his emails outside of the firm. It's one of those high entropy, high confidence alerts that you can action on, almost immediately.
Mm-hmm. I just want to go back really quickly. We do have an attendee that mentioned something about Sysmon. They said that one of the challenges was remote workers with no headquarters for data to flow to at this time. So is remote work typically a big challenge or roadblock that either of you are seeing with deploying Sysmon?
With log ingestion, depending on their connection.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Yeah, lots of organizations will have split tunnel, VPN set up, right, rather than always on VPN. And so I'm with Amanda there. It just depends on what your connectivity is. You could have some challenges there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but definitely servers.
Right. He said when he gets a server set up in Azure, he might be able to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, apologize for going back and forth on the topics here, but yeah, we're talking about business email compromise. It's surprising to hear that the cost of business email compromise can outstrip ransomware. You hear so much about ransomware in the news, but I guess business email compromise is more of a sneaky snake a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I've been there, done that. Like, I would say both of the organizations that I was at previously, prior to the implementation of things like, controls like multi-factor authentication, turning off that automatic forwarding outside the organization, they experienced business email compromise that led to direct financial losses, right, through wires going out to the wrong places. So I would say don't feel ashamed or alone. If it's happened to you, it's happened to almost everyone, right? Lots and lots of people have it happen to them, but there are some easy ways to prevent, detect, right? All of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And you're saying, AJ, at BreachQuest that you guys can help out with setting up email forwarding rules?
Yeah, I mean, it's simple things, right? Some things that people don't think about. We had one client that had a secure email gateway configured, but their SPF and MX record was configured and their Office 365 environment was configured to accept mail from sources other than their secure email gateway, right? And so if you went out and looked at their SPF record and their MX record, literally, and you could directly send email to their tenant, bypassing their secure email solution completely, which ended up leading to a compromise in this case. So BreachQuest has a really, I don't want to call it patented, but a really well-defined program where we can come in and quickly provide value to an organization and perform a business email compromise assessment with you, and sit down and say, look, here are some quick hit action items that you can do to harden and secure your environment.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the final test, pass the hash behavior. Amanda, do you want to take this one on?
Yeah, so like this is a good example of something that every pen test has. Anytime that there's a Windows environment, any pen test will do pass the hash and try and get credentials, right? At least everyone that I've seen. And it's one of those things that you think you have to be like this super amazing hacker to be able to run, and you don't necessarily have to. Here we have two different scripts that you can run that just output and dump the contents of LSAS, right, and puts it in a dump file, and that's basically what Mimikatz does. So you can run those, and that should be a fairly easy thing to detect also, and do that on anything. Like, I mean, delete that dump file when you're done with it. But yeah, it's a good thing to test, because it when you do have a pen test, they can be like, oh, you detected that we were running Mimikatz. Like, it's fairly rare from what I've seen.
And this is a pretty high confidence detection, right, AJ?
Yeah, it is. I mean, no one inside of your environment, unless you have a dedicated red team or a pen test going on, right, should be doing this. And then in either one of those prior cases, you still want to detect them, right, and say, hey, let's stop this person, regardless of, because the red team is testing your defenses, right, to see if you do detect it. As same thing from a pen test perspective. And the thing I'll call about Mimikatz, I don't know if anybody remembers the large security vendor that said stops Mimikatz, right? And I think I saw a picture of it on Twitter the other day. But always, have those detective controls lined up, in addition to preventative controls, because inevitably when that preventative control fails, having that detection capability is going to be super important. And so, I would say 100%, this is detected in your environment, you want to action on it immediately.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then this is what it looks like in Blumira, right, Amanda?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it shows you down at the bottom like what the process name was and what the command lines were that were run. I feel, oh yeah, this is a Sysmon one, right? So this is another one that's that Sysmon will detect on. You can also do it with just plain Windows logs, but Sysmon has it already built in, really easy detection to get with that.
Mm-hmm. And then let's talk about Logmira, the GPO. And you created this yourself, right, Amanda?
Yeah. So I was tired of like I said, I work in the lab a lot, doing like attacks and then trying to figure out how to detect against them. And every new lab, I would have to reset up logging every time, which was a pain, and took forever, because there's probably, it's on the next slide, but there's over 50 different settings that you have to do in a group policy to enable the correct logging in Windows for security reasons. And I was kind of surprised. There were a couple like PowerShell scripts out there that would do it, but that was all like just registry entries, and I didn't want to have to like run PowerShell against all of my hosts and worry that it wasn't actually setting the correct things. With group policy, you can just kind of do it once, and that's what group policy is for. And I was kind of surprised that there wasn't already a logging recommendation out there, or like set something that you could use. So I just went through and created a group policy object that's just for logging. It sets all of the correct security settings. There's two different versions. There's a regular one, and then there's a like a debug verbosity one, which is very loud. So don't use it unless you're debugging, especially on file servers, because it logs everything, and it'll eat up your log volume like crazy. So yeah, I just put it out there. It's on our GitHub, and you can just import it, and then you have all the correct settings in your GPO. Now, I didn't do it for a while. I didn't release it publicly for a while, just because as a former sysadmin, I would have never just like installed a GPO that some random person on the internet told me to do. But it seems to help out a lot of people, and I put the export out there, the XML export, so you can go and actually see what's in there. Definitely test it out first, make sure, do your due diligence. But it's just directly from our lab internally.
And the thing I'll add on to that is you take this script and all of those settings as an example. So 4625 is not on by default, right? So the previous account failed login, when we talk about password spraying or other attacks that are out there, And unless you've either gone in or manually configured or run this script, you're not going to see a 4625 event, right, in your SIEM. So having that visibility is really, really important. And as Amanda said, who is an extremely smart person, let her do the work for you. Take the script and run it against your environment, right? Instead of making your poor Active Directory administrator or sysadmin go through and check all the boxes.
Right.
Use Amanda's genius brain and just save some time for yourself.
Yes.
I used to have an old boss that would tell me, good artists borrow, but great artists steal. So Amanda is offering, is telling you to steal her stuff.
Steal it.
Absolutely. And we've got a handy slide of all the resources that we discussed here. But what I do want to talk about is, how we encourage our customers and our potential customers, if you want to set up a free trial with Blumira, to test out these detections on Blumira, right? Like we want to encourage that for sure, because it's really important that these detections work properly.
Yeah, hands-on customers are the best.
Absolutely. And
you want to test our detections, I am always willing to troubleshoot and tell you I'm wrong, because I'm wrong. I don't want to say a lot, but I'm wrong every now and then, and I like working through that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and our free trial for Blumira is incredibly easy to deploy. Our director of security, Mike Behrman, has told me a few times that multiple customers of ours have deployed that free trial in 30 minutes or less, which is pretty unreal, right?
Yes.
So we have a contest for everyone, try to beat 30 minutes.
How fast?
We want to see if it can happen.
Really, the only time it takes is how fast can you stand up an Ubuntu virtual machine. All you have to do is turn on that virtual machine and download, use a Docker script. It'll, you have to have Docker installed, which gives you that selection when you're installing it. But you run a Docker script and it downloads everything and sets it all up and connects back up to us. And then however you want to get your logs to us. So we have, it's called Blumira, which version 2 should be coming out here soon. Is an NX log configuration file, which is incredibly long, but it pulls from all the event channels. And NX log is free also. It's an engine that you would put like on a server or like some kind of endpoint that ships your Windows logs to us. So
Awesome.
however fast you can do that.
Love that. Well, thank you both so much for joining us. I think that we've gotten a lot of great information out to our attendees about how to easily test your SIEM. I've learned a lot personally. And we have some great upcoming webinars. Next Thursday, we have a webinar about incident response. AJ, so feel free to listen in on that. We've got an incident response best practices for OT environments, and we are presenting with our partner, Gen. We're really excited about that one. Pascal Ackerman is going to be joining us, and he's a very seasoned expert in the OT space. So we're excited for that one. And then I believe on the 29th of July, we have a webinar about Alien Vault versus Blumira, comparing the two and how switching from Alien Vault to Blumira is a good decision, and what sort of benefits we provide over Alien Vault, and some actual real life case studies about customers that have switched and what their experiences have been. So we will have some information there in the email that we'll send out later following up this webinar, but we're excited to have everyone join on those two webinars. AJ, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure getting to know you, and we hope to be in touch with future webinars, hopefully.
Absolutely. And for anybody that wants to get in touch with me, I am Scrumwell on Twitter. If you just want to chat about anything from IR through, cyber incident response plans or anything that BreachQuest can do for you, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. And thank you again, Amanda. And thank you to our attendees for joining us. We hope you have a great rest of the day and enjoy.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Hope you learned a lot. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.